I think I just did it. Yes.
It's
Yep. It's got, yep.
It's working. Now I can start.
It's working. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen so everybody can see, hopefully. And I'm going to go on my desktop and I'm going to, that's my email. That's not what we want to look at here. Here we go. So this is my PowerPoint, and we'll start on the first screen. Let me move the bar up a little bit. Let me see here, maybe get it out of the way. All right, so welcome everyone. I want to get started right away because I know you're all busy. And today we're going to talk about the role of a performance assessment in achieving 21st century competency-based teaching. So without further ado, I wonder if I can make this presentation. There we go. This will give you a little more. So what is competency-based education? It's a big word, competency. So it is defined as an approach that allows students to advance based on their ability to master a skill or competency at their own pace, regardless of environment. So it's a method tailored to meet different learning abilities. So we're going to talk about what the role of assessment, and we're going to talk about how to get students to a competency. So how we do that is I've chosen one competency, which is critical thinking, and I'll explain how that relates to the area of English language analysis. I don't know if you can see the whole PowerPoint with my face there. Let me see here. So how to achieve this goal in a classroom with a variety of different abilities. One way is to scaffold, and that is basically keeping the end goal in sight, but identify and describe purpose learning goals towards a competency within an area. So we have a rubric usually when we have an assessment, and I wanted my students usually to be familiar with this rubric ahead of time so that they know what the language of the rubric is and also how it relates to the competency and the skills that they need to learn. So I identify the rubric criteria, we talk about it, and we scaffold and chunk the learning in multiple classes over a period of time, depending on what they need to learn, and connect it to individual standards on the grading criteria. So I think I sent you a terms list before we started. So scaffolding refers to instructional techniques to move them towards that goal. Oops, let me see here. And okay, so competency, the competency we were going to look at today, let me see, is this here? Yes. So the competency we're going to look at today is critical thinking skills, and that's a very broad term, but it suggests that students think for themselves. And we're going to talk about the role of assessment in that. So how do we emphasize the relevance of a competency in daily life? I think it's really important for students to understand why it is important to learn what they're learning, and that should be a motivation. So the usefulness of the skill, knowing that they're going to have a goal in mind, rather something that is useful to them in work, in life, going on, and is how I would like to frame it, because I think when you think about the word assessment, most students think of it, it's something that makes them anxious. And it also feels like punishment in a way sometimes. I remember being nervous about these things myself in school. So the character is the usefulness of the skill, and we're going to show examples of relevance from daily life is usually a good way to start. Showing a practical step-by-step approach so it's not so scary. And also ask questions and be curious about their answers, right? Because if I ask questions and I read the answers, most of the time students know something. They have some prior learning so they start thinking about it already before we even start instruction. So, oops, it doesn't want to go forward unless I click on there. Okay, good. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So the connection between skills and the rubric. So if we were to focus on critical thinking skills through language analysis means that's my primary subject, and introduce the assessment criteria to the student first. So I'm going to show you the rubric. I'm going to show you some criteria first and the whole rubric, and all of there's links throughout this PowerPoint for everything. So you can refer to everything I'm talking about after we finish as well. And there's some lessons in here, some other things I'll show you. So language analysis definition, analysis refers to how a writer conveys meaning a message or a theme through language techniques, and such as figure of speech, sentence structure, tone, word choice, reading, and in writing. And the standard we're going to focus on today is analyzes and evaluates uses and effects of literary, stylistic, rhetorical, visual, and theatrical techniques. So we're going to look at some of those techniques today and try to make the link to how that is a critical thinking skill that is relates to the rubric. So here is so what I've took is this is the standard on the rubric. And this here is the highest competency that a student can achieve on that rubric. I'll show you the rubric in a minute. So I just want to go focus on that language. Student identifies themes, patterns within the text, and comments on the possible significance. And that is really important, the significance. So a lot of students as beginner critical readers will identify the literary techniques, but not really understand how it works and how it conveys a message. And that's where students have a chance to really do well. Once that is mastered, then they can go out in the world and look at advertisements and newspaper articles and all kinds of text and understand how an author kind of conveys a tone or a message, sometimes subliminally, sometimes without it being very concrete, right? So students is able to identify evidence that contains textual feature, literary techniques, and all of these things, and on the reader, and link their analysis of effect to significance, so that their analysis is insightful, original, and convincing. Original is just that it's their own words, their own analysis of what they are looking at, the text that they're looking at. So here is the rubric, and in the United States we use A, B, C, D usually. Some schools use different criteria. So this is very strong. This is what we just read, and this is the standard right here. And these in between parts is this, D, no evidence of process or understanding. Here is they're able to identify techniques, but not really understand what they do. And here is there's some really good analysis, but then there's other things missing. And here is a very strong analysis. So that's kind of how it works. So I have a process for this, and I'm sure most of you do too, because you're competent teachers and you all do this in some way. So I have the terms that I sent you are on this sheet. So this screen here is basically what I'm going to show you today, but it's just a short version of, so I want to just go through the steps first, and then I'm going to show you. So the do now is basically what you guys did, or you women did today before this lesson, those of you who sent me responses. And the do now is usually a question or two or three that gets the student thinking about the topic or the thing that they are going to learn ahead of time. So what that does is activate prior knowledge. because we all have some understanding of what, when we read something, we have an understanding of what the message is. We are trying to think about what it's, but the do now that you have today, the questions you had today, was meant for you to think about that. And I read your answers, and most of you had a really good understanding of the message, but sometimes not always, like what were the details within that advertisement that conveys that message. And that's typical of students, not to always understand. Like they may understand the broad and, broadly what an advertisement does, but not necessarily how. So introduce, does anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay. So introduce the purpose of the class. That's something I do next. And sometimes it's in a question. At Lemont Manhattan, where I worked, we had an essential question at the beginning to kind of get the students thinking about what they're learning and learning goals. I'm going to show you an example of that as well. That gets them focused on what they're going to learn. And the modeling, that's something I'm going to show today also. The modeling is when a teacher, I show how to analyze something in class first, and then I give them a second assignment using the same tools, and then they try it. Either I like to mix it up individually, in groups, and pairs. So often starting with groups, maybe moving to pairs, then individually as they get more confident. So a lot of this too, especially with assessment, has to do with confidence, because most people get anxious about assessment, and nobody likes to be, tested on what you know. So that's why it's good to get a lot of practice in. So practice using soapstone on a variety of text types. We can do it on group. We can do it on all kinds of texts, right? Advertisements, blogs, websites, and newspapers, novels, dramas, poems. It's good to try the same techniques over and over on different text types, so that and I have a text type presentation here we're not going to go into, but it's there, so you can link to it. Then a formative assessment. So that's an assessment that is not graded, or the intention with it. Sometimes we can grade it and then give them a chance to improve on the grade or fix it. So it's not meant to scare students. It's meant to give them a sense of where they are, and also give me, the teacher, a sense of where they are. And if they do badly on a formative assessment, then I would want to revisit some techniques, maybe try to teach it in a different way. And then model, and then I would try some different. So here I'm modeling soapstone technique. I'll show you in a minute. I'll model the Optic Method, which is a window pane analysis, which is two different visual analysis for advertisements or text with images. And then at the end of class, and at the end of every class, it's really good to have something what I call an exit ticket. And it's basically just a question at the end of class, or a couple of questions, or a short survey of some kind that gives me an understanding of what they got from that class. So because if I realize later on that they didn't understand something from that exit ticket, I may change the way I instruct or revisit something. Obviously, we're all in time constraints as teachers, but ideally that's how it works. So the next here is, these are the definitions that I just went over. So they're in the PowerPoint so that you can see them. We're going to move on. Basically, summative assessment is the final end goal. That's, to assess. That's what the rubric is for that I showed you earlier. And that's also to assess what they learned, right? What they learned in a unit, in a bigger picture, the critical thinking skill for how to analyze text, right? So moving on. So this is what I gave you to look at. And using critical analysis methods, you started with these questions. What is the purpose of this advertisement and how is it conveyed? Is it to inform or persuade, or who is the intended audience? So that is the prior knowledge activation, right? And I know all of you are in China, and I am based in the US. I'm in Europe right now, but I'm based in the US. So I have, obviously more knowledge about the African American community in the United States, and what we have in the US is called a Black History Month. We have a History Month of a lot of different groups in the United States, or groups that are highlighted. But this here is a big thing in American schools. So if you have students who want to go to America, this is something they should know about. And Black History Month is 1 month out of the year where African American or Black lives are highlighted in some way. Sometimes there are celebrations, events, things like that. So these two terms. So I want to just analyze this quickly. You've already, because most of you are familiar with it. So there is 3 areas of text on this. There's 2 images that are identical. Somebody said it looked like LeBron James. I actually, you know what? I think you may be right. And that's actually an interesting thing I didn't think about. But the thing about the advertisement that I think is the most important here is protester. Any questions? No? Okay, so there's the protester and rioter. One term has a positive connotation and the other has a negative connotation within the United States English system, right? Protester is considered, it doesn't necessarily have positive connotation, but it doesn't carry a negative connotation because it's not violent. And a lot of things have come out of protest in the United States. So the second image has the same exact typeface, the same color, the intensity of the red somebody mentioned. Color symbolism is a term that we use in English teaching. So color symbolism has a different meaning in different places, but the color red is either passion in the United States. It could be violence because of the color red is, associated with blood, red. I know it may have a different connotation in China, but that's what the meaning is here. So rioter is somebody violent, somebody who maybe destroys things, right? So somebody in one of you mentioned labels. These are labels, and it does speak to the perspective of the viewer, right? So you're absolutely right about that. And also, I have the right to be no matter what you call me. So it's absolutely about labels and how African Americans are often labeled in the United States. The significance of the image being the identical is also it highlights the fact that it is about labels. But and most students would have some kind of understanding of that, but they may not understand exactly how that message come across. So that's the techniques that we're going to teach so that they can recognize this in one text and then another and then another, and then they'll eventually have the skill to identify, for example, labels, image, how it's constructed. And there's also a rhyme in this. I have the right to be, meaning being in the world, no matter what you call me, right? So I am who I am, no matter what you label you put on me. And that speaks to the history of the United States with African American people who have been subjugated, enslaved, and so forth. And that also speaks to Black History Month, why we have it, right? So most of you did a good job on that. And so here is what I talked about also is the first I show them the rubric, I show them the end goal. Then for each class, each individual class leading up to that end goal, we have a screen like this, kind of the purpose of the class for the day, so that they know what they're starting with and where they're going. So essential question here is, how does language and images together shape our perception of the text or the image that we're looking at, or both, right? Our world now is so full of image and text, so it's really an amazing skill to be able to discern these things, right? And the purpose of today's class is to know key advertising techniques. There's an advertising lesson in here I have a link to, so you can use that. Understand the ads do more than just persuade people to buy things. They sell ideas, as in the case of the one I just showed you. And analyze an ad using soapstone and the Optic method. So this is one class. That's a lot to cover in a class. And when I was teaching this class, I had 1 hour and 30 minutes to teach this. If you have shorter time, I would just teach one technique. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to move on. I hear an echo, but I hope you don't. Model a technique for critical analysis. So I would first, one little point about that. When I model something or lecture something before they do it, I try to keep it to 10 minutes because students lose interest or attention, at least they do in the US, very quickly, and especially online. So if you teach online right now, then I would definitely, keep them to a minimum, the instruction, and then have them do something. So model a technique for critical analysis. So this is an acronym, which means SOAPstone, as speaker, occasion, audience, subject, purpose. Oops, I messed it up. The purpose and the subject is messed up. I have to move them. Okay, I'll do that later. But speaker, occasion, audience, purpose, subject, tone is a technique to, first of all, an acronym to remember. So when they have an assessment, because we're working on assessment right now, right? How to relate the assessment to the critical thinking skill. So the purpose of an assessment, they can't bring all kinds of papers and notes with them most of the time. So this is an acronym to remember, although I have misspelled it on here. It's an acronym to remember, SOAPstone, tone here, so for example, who is the speaker? Like that is, it's not always equally relevant to each text, but from what that is, let me show you a link to the SOAPstone. So I have this sheet. I hope you heard me there. I must have unclicked here. So there's a speaker, is the voice that is speaking. From what perspective is it told? Occasion, what time and place, why now? Why is the text now? Audience, who is it meant for? One note of caution there. In the US, at least, you try not to say a general, broad, everyone audience, because even though, try to narrow it down a little bit. Like, for example, the Black History Month, it would be an American audience, right? Because that's where in the United States, we have a Black History Month. I don't think a lot of places do. The purpose, what is the advertiser or the speaker or the trying to convey? And tone, subject is what is it about? Like, what is the topic? And tone, what is the feeling conveyed, the emotion in it, right? And there we go, back to this. So I have a link to an advertising lesson here with more techniques that you can use, but I just want to move on a little quickly because we're talking about the role of assessment and how to connect it, right? So I'm going to move on. So don't buy this jacket. This is for an environmental organization that are focused on repurposing old fabrics so that we don't create more pollution through the environment. So it says, don't buy this jacket because it's new, right? Because so it's kind of an attention grabber, right? So the text here means the opposite. It's ironic, right? It's irony. And then there's the word in here, the season shares some values. So we're talking about values in the environment, right? And then just the image of the jacket. I'm not going to go too much into this because I'm afraid I want to keep on track of time here. So let me move my, okay. The role of the exit ticket. So let's say we had a class, we taught the soapstone, I lectured the top soapstone technique. The student got some other text, maybe in groups to practice with. So maybe they got different advertisements to practice with in different groups. And then at the end of class, I wanted to kind of get back to the lesson of what did you learn today, right? So the purpose of the exit ticket and the formative assessment is to kind of ascertain for one, there's two purposes. One for them kind of to have a summary of what they learned, to kind of encapsulate, okay, I did learn something today. And the other is for me to have a look at what they did or what they wrote in the exit ticket so I can understand, you know, if they got it, right? If they didn't get it, I may have to change the lesson and do something else. So here are some questions I may give them. Describe 3 ways you may have been inadvertently influenced by advertising in daily life. Like, for example, there are certain very popular products, right? And that have very excellent advertising campaigns that make students want to buy something. It's good to be aware of that. You know, why do I want this so much, right? How am I influenced in this world? And then also maybe connected even, you know, critical thinking skills, right? Connected to how are these techniques that I looked at today used in other text types? Maybe not just advertisements, maybe in newspapers. How are advertising techniques used in politics? Or how can we change the world for the better by trying to influence through these techniques? And also, you know, do they have a responsibility? Look critically at advertisements to see if they are fulfilling their responsibility in society, or if they are. So formative assessment, this is one of the, so formative assessment doesn't happen every class. Exit ticket, I would do every class, like a summary to see what they've learned that day, for me to understand if the lesson worked or if it didn't. But formative assessment is maybe midway through, when they've learned some techniques and we're deep in the practice. And I want to assess how far have we gotten? Have they changed? Have they learned more, right? Have they learned, do they know more now than they did when we started the unit? Before we do a formative assessment, I would practice multiple advertisement, then do the formative assessment, maybe over a few days, many different techniques. And I'll show you a couple of more techniques in a minute. So I sometimes, you know, you can do a regular quiz, right? And then give them a chance to correct the quiz themselves, like write the answers out, for example. So it's not punishment because this is still in the practice stage, but you want to know also what they know. So I've also used sometimes because kids love games. They just love the games. So Kahoot is a good one. You can make your own. You can also search other teachers' Kahoots and then repurpose them and change them and edit them and copy them. So I like that because sometimes I'm out of time to do everything myself. Socrative, same thing. There's a teacher login. So all these are links that you could use. I hope they're available to you. Free Rice is a really good one. It's a little simple sometimes for complex ideas, but and you also don't have the right to modify, but it's a really good idea because it's an organization that actually donates food to people in need. And so when you play, there are more donations. so it's free rice, like grains of rice is the idea, that you give grains of rice. So those are some links to try. I mean, for kind of get an idea of what they know along the way. Okay, moving on. So a group project. Here is one that is a possibility for a formative assessment to kind of understand too what they have already known. Like a timed group project usually gets them going because they have to present something really quickly, right? Somebody's drawing on here. Okay, so create a Google slide presentation. You know, it could be a PowerPoint, it could be whatever format you choose. I don't know if you use Google, that demonstrates your group's understanding of the implication of consuming news via social media. So I have a link for that. Select 4 different social media outlets like Twitter, Facebook, etc., and you probably have different ones yourself. Analyze all aspects of the post, including text and image. And then I give them this project, finish in 25 minutes and present to the class at the end, right? Or share your PowerPoint with me and I will show the best one tomorrow, or whatever, you know, you have time for. But it's a way to get them going really quickly, and also to assess what they have learned and how they put it together, right? Okay, next, lesson 2. So here's, you know, this is like lessons I have had. I would but all of this doesn't happen in one lesson, and we're just going through it here. But I have another method here called the Optic Method. Optic, I've spelled it right. So overview, parts of the picture, title, interrelationships, and conclusion. So basically what that is an overview of the advertisement. Like, what is it? What is it showing? Parts of the picture is, you know, what should I focus on? The top, the bottom, the left, the right. Let's see here. The title, does it have a title? Well, this one down here, see the reality before it's too late. I care about global warming, so my advertisements are about that now. So you can see the penguins all happy up here, and here they're like kind of nose diving towards the end. What is the message here? That is, so what is the interrelationships and conclusion? What can you conclude? That's the conclusion. It's showing that see the reality before it's too late. The ice is melting, the penguins live on the ice. How is this affecting them and the world? Well, here we go, right? I'm not going to go deeply into this, but there is a sheet here, an Optic Method link with how to analyze visually. And this is again an acronym. So when they get on an exam, they can remember the acronym, but maybe not all. So to kind of remind themselves of what is important to analyze, right? Okay. Next, so let's see here, individual. I'm going to just make this smaller. So example of an exercise to solidify learning goals, individual activities, social media, and reliability. So now towards the end of a unit, it's sometimes, so this unit was about advertising and social media, and towards the end of a unit, you want students to be able to do it on their own without the help of their peers. So when I group them together or pair them together, I may be very conscious about who I put together so that they can either teach each other or work things out together. Like I already know how my students work together and who works well with who. So I may mix it up, but that's individually is how they have to learn it in the end, right? For an assessment. So this is a link to, can you spot this deceptive Facebook post? And it is about how, you know, foreign governments or companies try to influence versus someone's individual page. And so I give them this, and I have them sit down and so to think about, like, to discuss, like, which one is the right one, which is the wrong one. I don't want to go too far into this. I just want to give you an example of how to solidify learning goals. And you do it through a number of different ways, a number of different exercises throughout the learning, so that they get to think about it. And then at the end, often I ask, what did you learn from this exercise? What did it make you think about in terms of using the internet as one primary news source? Because a lot of students do. So I want to kind of give them that idea that maybe you should be this discerning, critical thinkers about where you get what you read, where you get it from, how you're influenced, right? That's the critical thinking skill. That's what critical analysis skills helps you develop, right? And then at the end, I often say, turn and talk with your partner if you have a partner. So lesson 3. So I teach usually the acronyms first, soapstone analysis. And then I teach the Optic Method. So soapstone is for text analysis. It's very broad. I would teach over a period of time lots of literary techniques, but that's just one, very beginner kind of way to do it. Then I'll teach the Optic Method for visual analysis, which is also a very basic, just to get your thinking kind of about it. And then finally, I would teach this much more detailed way of analyzing, and that's the window pane analysis. It's what it's called. And I'm going to show you what it looks like, because it's much more detailed, and maybe I'll have students use that in class, but they can't bring that on an exam. So I would introduce a variety of techniques, and then to solidify the thinking skills, and then also mix it up, groups, pairs, individually, have them teach, right, in front of the class together, to encourage them to speak and verbalize what they've learned, so they're not just sitting there and taking it in passively, because we want them to be engaged in the process. And teaching, as you know, because you're all teachers, we learn a lot from teaching, because we have to use our critical thinking skills in order to figure out how do we share this information in a way that the students that we have also understand the same things that we do in the same way, so that they can go out in the world and look at different advertisements and different texts and still understand how those texts communicate and how they influence us. So I have a link to a lesson here for this. Oh, I didn't mean to click on that. Let me see here. I don't know how to get rid of this drawing. Let's see. So this is a whole lesson on image analysis. There's link to print advertisement. I chose some good ones that I like here, so that you can use those if you wanted to teach this lesson. And then I'm going to actually open this one. This is the window pane analysis method. So here are lots of questions, right? The layout, the subject, the interaction with the viewer, the image represents a point of view. And there's a lot of questions here. And this is something, after I teach the soapstone and the Optic Method, I like students to really take their time and think about it. And that's when I introduce this, because it's a lot of things to think about. In an advertisement, people sit around in a boardroom, and a lot of very smart people who think about how can we influence you, right? And so it's really good for us to have an idea of how we are influenced by that. So this is for a company called United Colors of Benetton, which have traditionally used a lot of different people in their ads. And, the handcuffs here could mean a lot of different things, but I think it means that we are all bound together. We're all, no matter where we come from, we are a united world, which speaks to the logo, right? United colors of Benetton. And also, you know, a white person, a black person, and that's, so it kind of like emphasizes that message, and it makes the company look good, right? Because we are a global company, we are a company that cares about equality, right? That's kind of what it suggests. And it's also a little bit controversial, maybe, because there's handcuffs. So I would use the window pane technique maybe on this advertisement here. And so to get them thinking critically about what it is they're learning, but how they are influenced by this advertisement, really think about it. So I'm keeping track of time here. Good. Because I don't want to go over. And I think maybe I'll look at the lesson here. So here is a more detail. We have a little bit of time. That's why I'm going into more detail. So layout, component parts, tone, color. So I've highlighted some of the things that I have, want to focus on here. The subject, pose, how are they? Arm and hand gesture, facial expression, costume, identity, prose, and so forth. So here is focus and framing. So I've taken apart the window pane analysis. I'm lecturing this part, and then I give them this image here. Apply the optic method to this. Apply, the different techniques you have to different parts here. I'm going to go back to our role of performance assessment, because that's the end goal, the assessment, right? So next, formative assessment and exit ticket. These are the same ones I showed you before. So you can look at those together, and then I want to tie it all together here. So tying it all together, write a do now at the beginning of a lesson, model a technique that you're going to use on whatever it is. And I know some of you are not English teachers, you may be history teachers, you may be science teachers. It's always good to kind of demonstrate something and have them see it, and then give them maybe a different something to work on. It's hard to speak to a lot of subjects. I see a chat here. I have a question. What is the age of my students? Okay, I'll get to that. Let me just finish this and I'll get to that. That's a good question. I'm going to leave a little time for questions. So practice using the technique, model it, then have the students practice it with different things. Use a formative assessment when you're ready, when you think that the students have got it, but you just want to check that they really do. And that's when you could use a game, you could use a quiz, but the whole point is it can't be punitive. It can't be something that feels like a punishment. There's got to be, for a formative assessment, there's got to be some way for them to improve without being punished. And then practice the optic method and window pane analysis. So that is the difference. So different techniques, right? We had 3 different techniques for analyzing an advertisement here, so that they can both understand it visually, understand how text and image work together, and then finally an exit ticket at the end of each lesson. And that could the purpose be to solidify learning for them and solidify and for you to understand that they have gotten it. So when critical thinking and analysis skills have been learned, practiced, and solidified, then I would reintroduce the target assessment criteria. That is the rubric, right? The language of the rubric that we looked at before, the same rubric here. So we kind of come back to that at the end and we say, this is how you're going to be graded. And they're always nervous about assessment, right? So this is how you're going to be graded. So maybe I'll do an exercise even where they grade each other on a rubric, right? Before they before they have the actual assessment themselves, so they can. And sometimes I'm surprised how harsh they are on each other. So that they can, you know, see how they perform and see how other students in the class think they perform. And that's less work for you too. And here's the link to the text types again. So you can practice these techniques on a variety of text types. And I'm going to show you just briefly, and then I'm going to answer questions. Let me see here. Yeah, so here is the different types, features, examples, interview as a text type, and so forth. So a lot of different, like, what are the features of each text type? They should know that. And that's a whole other lesson. Okay, so I am going to now take questions. And there was a question here. So if you want to, somebody asked me, what is the age of my students? I have taught everything from 8th grade to 12th grade, but in the last few years, I've been teaching international baccalaureate. So they're older diploma programs, so they're older students. And yeah, 11th and 12th grade mostly. And it's also a very rigorous program. It's like IP. Some of you may be IB teachers. So I would love to hear any more questions if you have any. Please send me some. Does anyone maybe have a question about how to modify this for younger learners? When I work with younger students, like 8th graders or 9th graders, I would scaffold it more, maybe. I would, the questions I will ask will be more, maybe starting with more literal questions and then moving towards more open-ended questions. I don't think, I think, as you probably, in my experience with the grade level that I am teaching, is that I have a very wide variety of abilities or understanding when my students come into my class. So that's why I like to teach a variety of techniques. But I think scaffolding, yes, I can explain soapstone more. So scaffolding is scaffolding in smaller chunks towards the goal, I think, is more important with younger kids. Introducing vocabulary definitions and make sure they understand them ahead of time. I can explain soapstone more. So I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to move this over here. So this is kind of a sheet that I use for a variety of text types. This is very broad and general. I don't, it's not specific to advertisements. It's really mostly about words. So speaker, so the reason here it's spelled correctly too. So soapstone is the acronym. So these are because students get very nervous when they have to write an essay on an exam. And it's for them to, and especially if they have to, my students have to analyze text, meaning they'll get text that they haven't seen before, or sometimes they have seen it before, but it's, if they, you know, if they get something that they have to look at on an exam and then use the techniques that they have learned, this is just an acronym to help them remember what they should address, right? What they should talk about. So when they analysis, so first they're looking at the text, they're trying to understand what it's about, and then they have to write about it. So the speaker is the perspective. From what perspective is the story told or the message told? So the perspective of the person that it's coming from, the organization that it's coming from, the company that it's coming from, right? That speaker. or the narrative perspective, maybe first person or third person. Okay, can you explain more? So how did you check your students' critical thinking skills other than text analysis? Well, I'm focusing on text analysis now, but text analysis is a very big subject that is, how do I, critical thinking skills in other than text analysis. I will, that's a good question. I'm wondering if you're thinking about other subjects. So it depends on the subject. I teach theory of knowledge as well. So I will, for example, how do they understand a concept? I will ask questions, and their responses will have an indication whether what they have considered, right? So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers it. Let me look at the other questions before we run out. So you design different activities by yourself to encourage students to have critical thinking based on the topic of each class. Yes. Do you do some research in this field? Yes, I do. Obviously I choose the text, I choose the advertisement, I choose things that I feel will work well with the students that I'm teaching. So it's that's what we do as teachers, to figure out what are the let me see, you design, yeah. So what are the things that my students are struggling with? And that's what the whole exit ticket and formative assessment helps with too. You're teaching 7th grade. How can we choose proper topics that are suitable for young students? Sometimes it's difficult for them to practice. Yes, I think with younger students, I try to go slower. So I'll do a shorter text and we'll talk about each line in more detail. I'll sometimes choose texts that are less complex in language. I'll choose advertisements. If I was to teach advertisements to 7th grade, something that appeals to them, something they're interested in. And that goes for older students too, but you probably have noticed in the class, there are certain things that they like, and especially with advertisements, it's an easy thing to teach because they love it. Could you share this text with us? It is in, so I'm sharing with you the whole Google Doc, and there are links in this document you can click on, and I don't know if you don't have Google Docs, maybe Larton can download them and send them to you in a Word document so that you have the links. So that's what I can do. Yeah, so everything is in here. Yeah, so if you go back here, you'll see links throughout to everything I've talked about, including things we haven't really talked about, like, for example, some of my lessons. Like, for example, the advertising lesson here. That's also something you can take with you. Advertising technique, and you see here, this is a lesson that I've taught, so you can copy and change it as you wish. Yeah, but I've used a number of techniques that I've highlighted here. This is for older students, so you may not want to use all of those, but this is some of the techniques used in advertisement. So this is a big unit. I've had it, that I taught over a month or so. So any other questions? It's 3:01. Any questions? Okay, so I think we are finished then, unless anyone wants to sit around and chat with me or figure out any If you have any extra questions, I'd be happy to answer them also after this. And I hope it was helpful. And I hope you can find a way to modify this too for your own students. I know some of you have younger students. Thank you. I'm going to stop the share. And I'm going to see here if anyone else had any questions. I'll be happy to answer.
大家现在还有问题吗？如果没有问题的话，那我们今天的这个 session 就先结束了。然后2天之后 ，Mr. Jensen 会给我们带来最后一节课。然后我知道，就是 Mr. Jensen 在最后一节课，他会有20分钟到25分钟的时间，会给我们做 demo lesson，就是他会作为老师，然后我们会作为学生和他在线互动，在最后的一节课当中。所以到时候希望大家可以来参加。
All right.
Okay, I'm explaining that you're gonna have a demo lesson for us in the last session.
Yes, I'm going to have a demo lesson in the next session, and I'm going to send you some things to look at ahead of time.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you all, and it was nice to do this with you, and thank you for listening to me. It was fun. Have a good rest of the evening. Bye bye.
Hey,
Yes.
hello, Brigitta. I think I saw one more question. Would you like students to do now activity before the class? From
For the next lesson.
no, it's you can see the chat box.
Oh, the do now. Oh.
Nancy.
I usually have, I mean, sometimes I can have them do something ahead of time for class to prepare for the class, but usually a do now activity in my class is in the beginning of class when they walk in. So as soon as I sit down, they're already doing something. And sometimes there are students late, sometimes there's students, I don't know what your classrooms are like, but in my class, sometimes students are late. And so I have them sit down, I have it on the board as they walk in. So as soon as they sit down, I ask them to start doing this activity immediately so that when everyone's there, I'll start the lesson and then and then I'll do the instruction and then they'll do the practice and all of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your explanation.
All right. Thank you. Take care.